Welcome to the Real Estate Espresso Podcast, your morning shot of what's new in the world of real estate investing. I'm your host, Victor Menashe. On today's show, we're talking about navigating the fine line between collecting commercial rent and pushing your tenants to close their doors. Financial stress is all over the world of commercial. Rent collection used to be automatic at this time last year. Right now, revenues are down for most businesses. Most importantly, even if a recovery is underway in some businesses, the worry remains that the recovery won't last. We could experience a second wave later this year. We could see a subsequent lockdown. We see government programs to assist businesses drying up. In many cases, small businesses fail to meet the eligibility criteria for government assistance. Commercial tenants are asking for rental concessions, and they're clearly experiencing hardship. Vacancy in a commercial space is also a reality of the current environment, and solving a cash flow problem involves a two-pronged approach. Number one, getting existing tenants to pay the rent, and number two, finding new tenants to fill a vacancy. It's often tempting to believe you won't find new tenants in today's environment. And while it's true that many businesses are having a hard time, there still are a small number of new businesses looking for space in the current environment. It means getting aggressive on pricing and concessions in order to attract them. Today, we're looking for tenants that are doing a bang-up business. At a time when the economy is on life support and the unemployed number in the millions, it's hard to imagine that businesses are booming. They do exist, there's just not many of them. In one of our properties, we had a single vacant retail space, and we managed to find a tenant that was in desperate need of additional space, and we had a space that was ideally suited. They moved in a matter of weeks. At the other end of the spectrum, we have tenants that have been forced to close during the pandemic. They're being kept afloat by government emergency benefits. They're paying a fraction of their rent. They seem to be teetering on the brink of closing. We asked them this week to pay the full month's rent, and they said they simply don't have the cash. They would have to close their doors permanently. So we accepted partial payment and applied for another round of government relief on our rents. It's a lot of paperwork for another 30 days of rent relief. The cycle of negotiation with this tenant will repeat again in another 30 days. At this time, the name of the game is survival. It's not a time to optimize and maximize highest and best use revenue. It's time to be pragmatic. We entertained several potential tenants for the single vacant space. One was a construction firm that would have used the space as an office and as a material depot. They were looking for a low rent situation, and there was concern that the traffic of equipment and materials would be incompatible with the other existing tenants in the building. We entertained the owner of a coffee shop who had rented space a few blocks away at a much higher rental rate. She was losing money and could not afford her very high rent. She was looking to break her existing lease and to get into a lower cost lease. Now, when we evaluated her financials, it was clear that moving to a lower cost space would help her situation. But the deal breaker was the realization that she would have needed to sell an unrealistic amount of coffee, not only in her old space, but in the new space as well, just to fund the monthly rent, without paying staff, buying food, or generating a profit. We completed that analysis in less than 5 minutes of looking at her business model. If our tenant could not figure out that her own business wasn't financially viable, then she clearly demonstrated a lack of business awareness. That means the chances of her surviving in our location were not much better than the chance of survival in her previous location. So when we qualify a tenant, we're not just looking for demand for the space. We're looking at whether the tenant has a realistic shot at surviving for the duration of the lease. We'll perform a financial analysis of the tenant's business and make sure we understand their business and determine that their business is viable. I know what you're thinking. Victor, you're being too picky. Just get a tenant into your space and get some revenue. We agree in being pragmatic up to a point. We're making sure that we won't have a new vacancy in 3 to 6 months. So the additional rent from the new tenant is being used to cover the negative cash flow and is making it easier to negotiate rent concessions with the existing tenants. We're not making any money at the moment, but we're not bleeding red ink either. Our lender called this week out of the blue and thanked us for being current on our loan, despite the pandemic conditions. Now, we had not asked the lender for any loan concessions. I didn't speak with him directly, but I'm told he had a degree of surprise in his voice that we were paying our loan payments on time. So if you have commercial tenants, now's the time to be creative, flexible, adaptive, and disciplined. As you think about that, have an awesome rest of your day. Go make some great things happen. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.